Yeah, and sorry, I messed up the times because I don't know. Google betrayed me.
Well, thank you very much indeed for having me on. It's a great honor.
Nah, yeah, it's nice to have you here. I feel in chatting a little bit about trying to schedule something, and it finally came into being. All the stars aligned properly.
Definitely, it just took a shoulder dislocation.
Yeah, on the mend.
Absolutely right. So,
Well,
with any luck, I'll maybe have gone up one toughness thanks
all
to
right.
the
So I don't
surgery.
really.
Toughness 4 human. Who knows?
Do
Not
most
many of
shoulder
those.
dislocations result in surgery? I mean, I haven't dislocated my shoulder, so I'm not too much on the up and up. But like,
I think it's because of the bone damage. So it ended up being so it's like an anterior dislocation. So the arm went back and up. So a section of the socket just basically came clean off. So
Yeah, that's rough.
in most instances, it's like it's mainly men in their 30s playing sports.
yeah.
Funny that. But no, this wasn't sports, sadly. It was it's a set of stairs, and I think it was just the force of the fall. So it's quite a steep set of stairs, so a little bit unfortunate. But I think on the whole, other than some tissue trauma like muscle and ligament damage, generally speaking, people just maybe wear a sling for a bit, and then they're kind of okay to get back. But I'm looking at a fairly long recovery period. But I'm sort of checking out my right hand, making sure that it's got feeling and everything like that. So I can obviously after the first couple of weeks, first 2-3 weeks, I can maybe have a look into getting back into doing some very light hobby stuff, which maybe will take the form of painting, which is probably a good thing because I've got a ginormous backlog of stuff that I need to get through.
Yeah, I feel. Don't we
Whereas
all?
with things like anything that needs, if I need to apply pressure, like drilling or cutting, like sawing, I think that's out of the question for the time being. It's like quite a jarring motion, and I need to keep this basically as stable as possible for the time being. So, but like holding an airbrush and using a brush is going to be very gentle movements. So we can go with that. Essentially, it's just a bit of a boon that a lot of the heresy events that had been scheduled for later this year, like October, November, thanks to Nurgle, have been delayed until February, March next year. So I should, with luck, be able to get as much done once I'm sort of fully better. Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, I mean, anyone that will know me, even through the internet, or through my Instagram, for example. So I'm pretty prolific. So I try to use my time really wisely when it comes to hobby. So obviously, this setback, I'm not the kind of guy that's just going to sit on his ass watch,
Wait it out.
wait it out, or watch Netflix, like watch the entire back catalogue of Netflix the entire time. I'm trying to do some reading and stuff like that, but also learning how to do this video and audio editing, and playing around with these videos, and sort of even from the first video to now with this retrospective series, using that time to open up other areas of ignorance, so to speak. So I'm a bit of a technophobe. I'm quite old school with a lot of things. So it's a really good sort of silver lining, if you will. Whilst I can't do, the bread and butter that people are used to, using it positively in other ways. And I'm really glad that you've been enjoying it. Really, I crave feedback.
It's always good to have good feedback. Actually, Adam, maybe we have Tony's in chat here. Thanks, nice to have you here. He suggests that maybe he doesn't have sound on you, Adam. You should look in Streamlabs and make sure. Make sure we have sound, because I don't know. As the technophobe, as you mentioned, there's something always not quite right.
I mean, I think eventually it could be a really good opportunity, as something I've considered before, the idea of maybe Patreon or something along those lines, where, I don't know if you guys, there's a guy from Wales called Miles, who runs a painting studio called Lil Legends.
Yeah, he does a lot of heresy stuff.
Very, very, very good painter, extremely innovative, and he's got a very specific style. But he creates a lot of very high quality PDFs as well as videos for Patreon. And I think that could be down the line something that I maybe will get into. I know that the whole YouTube versus Patreon thing is an interesting subject.
It's
quite divisive, because a lot of people hate the idea of there being a paywall with Patreon. But at the same time, I suppose, like, if I were to work hard enough at YouTube, and it's the end goal isn't ultimately make money. It'd be amazing to have a living out of model making, for sure. But there's obviously like obstacles you have to overcome with YouTube as well.
YouTube certainly, with such a small niche kind of hobby, I think it would be difficult to be making a living just off YouTube revenue. Like, you're not like reviewing technology like phones or something, or like everybody, or largely everyone is somewhat interested in or has a phone now. And so I feel that's harder. So I feel even the bigger YouTube channels, like painting ones or something, they still have like Patreon accounts to sort of make up for that. And I guess it's sort of a hard subject too, that I feel if you can be consistent with sort of the content you're providing on it, I think that's fine. But I think it can be hard, like, to jump in that directly without the backlog of making videos or making content, because I would feel bad about jumping into Patreon and then within 2 months like largely stopping really producing the stuff I said I would. Not to say that like you would do that or something, but
what are you accusing me of exactly?
But I feel like, but I mean, in your case, for example, you already produce a lot of content and you're making YouTube videos, and now like I feel like you've gotten sort of your feet wet with some of that, and it would be easier now to start that or start something like that a little bit in the future, once you already kind of know what you're doing with that and have a better sense of what you would want to do and what you'd want to offer.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. It's always going to be like a learning curve with stuff like that. And you're never going to please everyone all the time. To quote Bob Marley. But yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's one of those things, just to play around with stuff. And I think a lot of the people who are very passionate about one viewpoint or another are going to be the most likely to give feedback with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, no,
it's going to seem more polarized maybe than it actually is. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just one of those things really that I'll have to mull over and have a chat with some of my closer hobby friends about.
Yeah, Tony here in the chat, the YouTube chat, mentions that he's seen a few creators move into like the sort of buy me a coffee thing, or I'm not sure what that's called, but I've seen it a bunch as well.
Actually, can people hear me now? I think I've fixed everything. Well, keep talking at us, because I can hear you, but okay. It seems like
Nick's in the chat too.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, so the streaming stuff we use is called Streamlabs OBS, and it seems like
he can hear us. So.
Okay, yeah, periodically it like just changes settings and stuff on you, and it's not always that obvious when it happens. So
yeah. Well, Nick in the chat here in YouTube even suggests that he doesn't mind if it's sort of like that it seems more like a donation than a paywall. And I don't know, that's kind of maybe the way I sort of like it too, maybe the best, where it's like you're doing this content, and even like you've already done, Jack, here, that, it's not like you're going to stop with the hobby. Like, it's something that you're passionate about, but if someone could help support you, or that would be nice, because it is expensive. And even if you like for YouTube and such, getting better cameras and microphone, like all that stuff is expensive, and it's something that you'll probably be drawn to do eventually, just out of your own cycle of getting better and learning more and such. And like it can be a little bit cost prohibitive to just, like, can be hard to say, like, well, what will I gain from spending like $200 to get a better microphone? And like, will people even hear that? Like, and just can be hard to justify stuff when the hobby itself is more expensive than or I mean, most hobbies are expensive, but it's still, you could put that money into buying more paint, or more Death Guard, or more of the expensive Forge World models.
Yeah, I mean, I think in fact, you can see on the screen on my page there's a website called coffee.com, which is this donation page, I suppose. And I actually ended up I got quite a lot of criticism from people that I know in the UK about setting up a page, because at the time it was sort of like, okay, I also do commissions, and I've got 3 commissions currently, which I've had to press pause on, and because of my injury. And I've also got I can't take any more commissions for obvious reasons. And it's a supplementary income, so it's not by any means the lion's share of what I take home. So I have a day-to-day as well. However, the uncertainty moving forwards with regards to recovery and all this kind of stuff. I mean, to some people this is just going to sound like a bit of a poor excuse, but ultimately I got criticised for quote unquote begging, if you will, which is a bit funny. But it's entirely voluntary. If people are happy with me producing content and just taking it as it is, no problem whatsoever. But at the same time, if people did want to be supportive in another way, I mean, people are ultimately more than supportive, more than enough, give it more than enough support, I should say, just by following my work across social media, full stop. So, but if they did want to go a little bit further, by all means, that's their choice. I don't want to feel like I'm coercing anyone. And the person who critiqued my decision to put this page up was saying, like, I'm preying on weak-willed individuals. And I thought, okay, well, that's very presumptive of my followers in general. To imagine me as this sort of puppet master saying, okay, guys, you've got to all now pledge X amount of money to me, and that they're going to say, oh yeah, of course we're going to, because you told us to. I mean, it doesn't quite work that way. And I just found it quite interesting, an interesting point of view. But I won't linger on that too much at any rate. So.
Yeah, there's always going to be kind of detractors or whatnot, but I don't know. If I feel if your heart's sort of in the right place and you've thought and like kind of what you want to get out of it and what you're providing, like I don't think
it's
it's
really
worth
easy
losing
to
too much sleep.
complain on the internet. And as I think it's also very much the type of thing, most of the time, the only thing you really will hear from people are those that are like super excited about like what you're working on, or those that have some really negative opinion about it. So like it can be pretty polarizing.
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah, it's true. So, well, yeah, that's just a thing that I feel like increasingly more and more people are going to be thinking about this and making kind of their own choices about who they want to support or if they want to start a similar thing. Because I feel more and more hobby channels or groups are doing that sort of thing, which I mean, I think is a testament to just the hobby growing and there being more interest.
Yeah, no. And I mean, ultimately, I feel it's probably good. Like, I think a lot of people, and I mean, even ourselves included, like, when you start out with the hobby, you have a pretty narrow view of it. And I think it's good to see more of a breadth of, like, just different focuses on the hobby, because there is so much there. There are so many, like, you, for instance, have a very you focus a lot on like the Horus Heresy and stuff like that, and you're very detail oriented towards some of that stuff, and like it's neat to see like a focus like that, whereas we've certainly not really focused in that direction, but like we certainly appreciate that interest and level of detail.
Tony here mentions that tip jar culture isn't like as common in the UK, and that he often prefers like if stuff's free, but supporting creators to keep like them going and stuff deserves a few quid here and there. But yeah, I feel it is probably a little more common in the United States. But I think with stuff like Twitch becoming more popular, that it's becoming more of a thing because like Twitch pretty much it's all donation stuff. I mean, admittedly, a lot of it's like video games sort of stuff, people playing Fortnite, whatever. But it's still most of that is just all voluntary contributions just because you enjoy that stuff, which does seem a little odd at first, but I guess it is becoming more common. And if it's something that you get a lot of enjoyment out, like, yeah, I see
mean,
no
people,
problem
I guess,
with it.
when people used to go out and watch movies and stuff, like, say, on a Friday evening, you'd go out and pay, like, I don't even know how much a movie costs now, but, like, that's not really that much different than if you are watching someone streaming or something and you donate some money. So, yeah, I think culture with some of this media and stuff has certainly changed, and it is, I still find it strange to go on and see like how much people do watch like Twitch streams of people playing Hearthstone or whatever games and whatnot they're playing.
Or even just watching people paint miniatures. That's like a new thing too, kind of.
Or watch people like repair cars or whatever. Like there's a lot of information out there that you can find if you're looking for it, which is neat. I mean, certainly now it's a great time to just join the hobby in general, because there are so many people out there putting out content, kind of giving sort of a window into how they approach things, and like you can learn a lot from all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, off the back of that, there's often this word toxic, which is used an awful lot. And I know that all communities are going to have more toxic elements, so to speak. They are there, obviously, but I find it very, very unfair that a lot of people will make out as if in this entire group of people, or a niche within this group of people, do nothing but berate and add negativity, and they don't support and all this kind of stuff. When in reality, I mean, I think you just have to look at the stock prices at Games Workshop to see how it's going from strength to strength, despite the whole global crisis that's going on. There's more uptake, more people feel welcome in the hobby now than ever. If people don't feel welcome, then obviously that's an issue.
Mm-hmm.
It is a hobby for everyone. And, I think obviously there's been an interesting, people should still be in a position where to a greater or lesser degree, they're able to express how they feel about, let's say, statements made by Games Workshop, for example, or how they're supposed to feel about specific things, or the company direction, things along those lines. But I think it's interesting that I'd say there's a very, very small minority of people within these communities who do nothing but add negativity.
Yes.
Right? I think that's you could count that the amount of people in one hand probably, but they're very vocal. I've been very staunch about opinions on things like Primaris Marines, for example, or more specifically, Mark 10 armor in Horus Heresy, for example, and people have decided that that's a very toxic approach to have. Now, I don't really understand how they've gotten to that conclusion, but at the same time, I maybe have a very stubborn point of view on a particular thing in my hobby. # my hobby. Is, again, I shouldn't have to drop my opinion on how I want to do hobby to completely accommodate other people, for example, because ultimately, when you're playing a tabletop game, there are two participants, not just one.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Which is a very good argument I heard about this whole thing anyway. But at the same time, with the whole, across social media and YouTube and stuff, I do try and be approachable and tell people to get in touch if they need help, and I get messages frequently from people asking how I've done a particular thing, or where I've got it from, or what tools I'm using, and I think it's just one of those things where I was chatting with Eric about it yesterday when we were doing like a video check, but like how I've totally lost my train of thought now. Bugger. Talking too quickly. But just basically.
There's certainly some negativity. And admittedly, I feel we can probably get into some of that as well in sort of the podcast portion of this, because I think we'll probably touch a little bit on the Horus Heresy community and maybe how Games Workshop has sort of done a disservice to themselves by somewhat letting the community on its own and not really supporting it as much as they used to. And I think that has kind of resulted in people being a little bit more upset when they don't think that Games Workshop is doing as best as they could. But I guess with that in mind, we could just go into the podcast sort of portion of this and ask some of the general questions and such. I think that would probably be fine. Does that sound okay for everybody?
Mm-hmm. That sounds certainly good.
Well, if that's, I'm gonna play our overly long intro music here, and then we can start this. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dragged into Turbolasers, a Between the Bolter and Me podcast. This is episode 77, and I'm your host, Eric Wire, and I'm here today with my two brothers, Adam Wire.
Hey, everybody.
Gregoire.
Hey, everyone.
And I'm extremely excited to say we have a guest, our friend Jack, or better known as Anvils of Konor, on. Nice to have you here.
Lovely to be on. Thank you very much for inviting me, and hello everyone.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you here. It'll be fun to talk a little bit about some of your projects and hobby work, which I feel probably a lot of people listening to this are probably familiar with you through Instagram and maybe even now a little bit with your YouTube channel. But you have a lot of experience making fantastic Horus Heresy armies, which admittedly is a little different from some of our usual topics and stuff, with us being maybe a little more focused on Inquisitor 28 sort of stuff. But who doesn't love a good Space Marine, right?
Yeah, very true.
But yeah, so it's great to have you here. And I mean, I guess we can just get directly into some of our questions and such. But maybe just to start this, could you maybe introduce yourself a little bit and talk how you sort of got involved in the hobby, and if it was like always 30K or if you were dabbled in 40K and stuff like that too?
Yeah, for sure. So essentially, I think I was probably 7 years old, and there's a toy company called Toys R Us.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're bankrupt now. I don't know if something happened to them financially over the last few years, but it was Christmas, I guess, like 25 years ago, and my mum went and bought my oldest brother Joe a copy of Warhammer 40,000 second edition.
Oh,
Rad Angel on the front.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically press ganged my other brother Tom and I into making the models and painting them for him. So it was more of a sort of an initial indentured servitude into the hobby. But from that, you kind of, the visual aspect of Warhammer and Warhammer 40K has always been very apparent with a lot of their literature, a lot of their rule books, and this sort of just very what's the word, awe-inspiring, and very much getting on your imagination and things along those lines. So you sort of look at these colorful pictures and you see these images of grim dark and all this kind of stuff. You've got all these extremely talented artists across the board who really entice new beginners, basically new starters.
The second edition was great in that they had the 3 little rule books in there. There was the Codex Imperialis, which had all sorts of awesome black and white artwork of creepy Tyranids. And I feel it did a really good job of conveying the breadth of the universe and sort of the depravity of the Imperium of man. And I think that was great because it was also how we started. We started with that second edition with the I think I recently saw a picture on Instagram of someone kind of comparing one of those second edition push fit Marines with like a Primaris Marine. It's like, yeah, wow, things have changed a bunch over that time.
Yeah, for sure. And I think whilst at the time you don't really necessarily have much interest in the sort of philosophy or the idea of grimdark as a whole, which I think attracts a lot of young adults and adults to certain aspects of 40K, for example, specifically. And then I guess by extension 30K, because you still have these like massively built up hive cities, which house billions, tens of billions of people in a relatively small area and all this kind of stuff. But the visual aspect is very, very interesting. And then I think I've always lived quite locally to our local Games Workshop, which is like a 25-minute walk away. And I know that to Americans, the idea of walking to a Games Workshop would be horrific. Everything in cars, right? But the staff there being looking up to them and thinking, oh my God, these guys are so cool. They've got ponytails and they listen to heavy metal and all this kind of stuff. And then I think I got to about sort of 16, 17, and my attention kind of shifted somewhat. And then I guess, I never really did like whole armies of stuff. I always had that sort of hobby butterfly thing, and always have their big releases and stuff. But I remember looking at a copy of White Dwarf years ago when Juan Diaz, who's this extremely talented sculptor who did like some of the old metal Slaneshi demons. He also did the Emperor's Champion.
Yeah, he did.
And I remember just looking, I couldn't get enough of this picture of the Emperor's. I was like, this has got to be one of the best models I've ever seen. And I was absolutely spellbound. But then I guess I kind of on and off for a few years, but really got back into things in as much as using like Instagram as a platform to share my work and all this kind of stuff. It would have been about 2016, probably late 2015, early 2016. And then I kind of really started getting back into it again. So I on and off have been quite interested in Magic the Gathering as well.
Okay.
But I realized that it's impossible to go all in with both, really. So I threw my lot in with Warhammer, and I'm eternally grateful for that.
Not keeping up with the standard grind of Magic, getting all the new.
I mean, seeing the state of affairs with Wizards of the Coast at the moment, I'm extremely happy to have gotten the hell out of there. But basically, I spent a lot of time. So I used to work up in London, in not quite central London, but East London, working a management job in a jewelry shop. So I long hours, long commute. I ended up leaving and just spending some time off, and I really sort of got back into the whole converting aspect of things. And I've always primarily, I guess 90% has been about converting models for me. And then over the course of time, a little bit more of that's been populated by like knowing the rules and painting models and knowing the lore and stuff like that as well. I mean, it's impossible to have a balance, right? As I'm sure you guys.
Oh yeah, there's so much.
Yeah,
there's
definitely.
so much.
And I ended up spending a year living in South China teaching English, and I ended up bringing like a very small. In fact, let me see if I can grab it quickly. So it wasn't the same contents, but I had like a hobby box this size that I brought with me.
That's great.
With like, I think some Space Wolves to work on or something. And then I ended up every month, I'd still be buying stuff from like Heresy Trading, which is a really good resource on Facebook. I'd be buying stuff from there, and my mum would be forwarding these care packages with stuff like ground coffee and English chocolate, because China don't really do coffee or chocolate. Right? Oh, I mean, they do chocolate, but it's predominantly like American stuff like Hershey's. That strong divide between American chocolate and English chocolate. But
Hershey's chocolate isn't that good.
Yeah, and it makes me sad because Kraft fairly recently bought Cadbury, which is
really?
But with these packages, she'd send out bits, and then using these bits, I'd be able to. So I worked maybe 16 hours a week, so I'd have an enormous amount of time to work on new projects and stuff like that. And I just would try new things. I'd do models for different legions and all that kind of stuff. And then it was then that I actually started work on my Death Guard, which is sort of the mainstay. I mean, since then I'm extremely fortunate now that I've got I live with my girlfriend, and I have an entire room for
that's nice.
So, which is I'm sat in there at the moment. I'll do a tour at some point, I'm sure, on YouTube or something. But yeah. So, and then modern day, just trying to continue being creative, I suppose, and getting stuff out there for people to enjoy it. Hopefully inspire people, really.
Well, I mean, I think you're pretty well known for your like intricate conversions. Like, you have a great way of combining like parts and stuff from a whole huge range of different kits, and then also like really fine, nice and neat sculpting work to kind of bring all that together. And then on top of that, I think one of my favorite things to watch you work on is just all your little intricate bases and like all the little details and stuff that go into that, because I think having nice bases really helps bring a model together and kind of can elevate that level of storytelling, and you do a really nice job of all of that, and it sort of all works together in your favor.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, just quickly on the topic of bases, like you said, it's, if you can imagine, ultimately it's a game where you would be using these models in some way or other, whether it's the 28mm Inquisitor style games or Kill Team or table, like full on front line games and stuff like that. But each model is a snapshot of what it's doing within that greater battle. So, like, in fact, in my last retrospective video, I mentioned that there's often that phrase "bases and faces." So it's really important to, obviously, the face is usually always going to be the focal point of the model. But at the same time, you need to create this. You need to maintain this immersion, I suppose, and you need to put these models in a context that people can relate to. Now, obviously, we can't relate to battlefields in the 31st millennium, but the human element, which is obviously prevalent within 30k and 40k alike, and Mordheim and Warhammer and all this kind of stuff, they're still going to be making stuff in the same kind of way. I mean, there'll be materials, and there may be a slightly different aesthetic. I mean, obviously, the Gothic aesthetic is prevalent in 40k. But we have Gothic cathedrals. This is where this kind of stuff was
where those came from.
So creating that industrial or like ruined cityscape kind of thing, and I think that it's a niche within the hobby in general. But I think it's very enjoyable to get into, to sort of spending a bit more time. If I'm going to spend X amount of time on a model, I'm not just going to put it on ready-made base, if that
like
makes
sense. A shitty slaughter base or something. Yeah. No, and I think
base, not a square base. Never here.
No squares. No square bases.
Never.
Oh, that's cool, because I think, and that also can be very cohesive for creating like an army or a force. Like it puts it in a setting, and I think that's great. I mean, I guess you're pretty renowned for creating your like true scale Space Marines. How quickly did you, like, when you kind of got back into the hobby in a larger way, was that something you started to do right away, and what kind of convinced you that you should do that to begin with?
Well, I think we'll get into the abdomen bit in a little bit, but I think I'm definitely in agreement with you guys that I always had an issue with the old I guess it was 3rd edition onwards. I think the multi-part plastic.
Yeah. I think 3rd edition is the 3rd edition box with there's garbage Dark Eldar.
Had such wide legs, and I just thought. Okay. So initially, I think I would cut the soft armor joins and play around with the feet and get them at least looking a little bit more sort of erect, I guess, for want of a better word. A little bit more like a slightly more realistic posture, because they're not just going to crab walk everywhere.
You sure? I mean, that these are genetically modified humans. Like maybe they wanted that.
It's extremely low center of gravity.
But
I think I like the idea of just making them a little bit more in proportion, and I think just elongating. I think it was quite a while ago, back on Bolter and Chainsword.
Good old Bolter and Chainsword.
I do have a forum on there, or thread on there, sorry, that I haven't posted anything on for quite some time. But I did that mainly when I was abroad. So it does become quite a lot to maintain those threads. And I think I saw someone on there. Obviously, you have Doghouse, which is he's very well known for using Terminator legs. Back in the day, and I thought, okay, I think I'd seen someone who'd done a fairly similar situation doing spacing but using plasticard. I essentially just varied that slightly to make it a little bit more sort of more effort overall, but higher chance of success, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
using a core of 1 millimeter copper, so you can, before you fill that gap in with putty, you can just make sure that the angles are absolutely dead on, because if you're using plastic glue with sheets of plasticard, if you get it wrong,
it can
once
just,
it's fused, you're kind of fucked, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
So yeah, I mean, it just sort of evolved from there, and you can see from some of my very early work that I'd use like just green stuff on its own, but green stuff as a medium in general isn't. Once it's dry, it's a bit of an arse to work with.
It is.
Yeah, I always cringe when you get people. Yeah, so this is like a really old. This is maybe even like 10-year-old stuff that I've got that I worked on back in the day. So this is before cataphractii models were available from Ford.
That's cool.
But once green stuff's dry, and you get people who are like, oh, you just sand down the green stuff, and it makes me small part
no.
because it's just not how. Anyway, I won't go into it too much, but it makes me cringe because
the material isn't that good for.
Yeah, it's very rubbery, and it doesn't respond well to those sorts of tools. So then evolved that to start using a mixture of green stuff and milliput, for example.
And
a lot better. Very well. You kind of get the best of both worlds. It's much easier to work with than, say, neat milliput, which requires moisture and it gets extremely messy.
It does.
But at the same time, when it's cured, you can use a file, you can use sandpaper, you can use a very fine scalpel blade, which is my number one tool. I only ever really smooth stuff down with a scalpel edge, because it's just, from my experience, the most accessible way to do it, best way to do it, if you will. But yeah, I mean, so kind of that's how I kind of really got into it, and then I've done variations of it from there. Some models have been made by G-dubs, and they have much better proportions, so they don't require any true scaling, so to speak. And others just sort of, it helps fit in with the continuity of my army now, because I do both power armor and Terminator armor, similar methods, just to make sure that they're all kind of in the same thing there. So this picture here is a Weapon Master veteran, and I've used the legs from Ashen Circle, which is a word bearer specific unit, but they've actually managed to make them
they look decent. A lot better.
Yeah, absolutely right. So I was able just to splice that across the waist, and put one body part on another, and it worked out really well, because there's always the risk. And I think there's probably been a few examples where I've probably overdone it, and I've made them probably a little bit too tall. And you kind of, okay, well, oh shit, how am I going to cover this up? But am I going to have to put like a loincloth here just to make it seem like the legs are a little bit chunky?
GW does that all the time.
I feel, we've talked about this at length, but I sort of feel like with a lot of models, like, this was very true with some of the older Terminator models, like, as soon as they put like a loincloth or some other thing there in between their legs, it's like that is almost like an excuse to just allow them to have the crab squatting poses and stuff. And it's like, if you look at a lot of those models, if you just trim that out and then look at the model, it's like, oh my god, it looks so much worse. And so like you don't necessarily immediately notice that there's something not quite right here.
Well, I feel it's interesting to hear that like one of the starting points for you to try to do these conversions was just how awkward and bad the poses were, rather than just strictly a proportion thing, which I guess just speaks to a point that some of those original Space Marines, they had a lot of problems. And then with different people working on them over the years, some were better than others. And like, there's always something you can sort of correct and improve, and just like making more reasonable poses, like you said, I think can help a lot and sell a visual imagery, even if you don't like correct everything, because there's always something more you could be doing. So
Yeah, I mean, even as far as some of the more recent work that I've done, relatively speaking, I've been using a lot of the 40K Plague Marine bits and bobs. And I think, barring, like, there's only a couple of instances where, just for the sake of proportions, I've then elongated their legs as well. And they're kind of roughly Primaris sized anyway. So now, but it's more important. I'd rather not be, and again, I've got to be very careful with this word, but lazy, because again, what I find lazy to other people is an awful lot of effort.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would. I would struggle to think anyone would say that, like, if they look at some of the stuff you're doing, that they would consider it lazy. But I guess everyone kind of has a different.
Yeah, but I think, like, just in terms of having that proportionality there, have that correct, then, you know, working on these models, going that extra distance just to make sure that they are in keeping and they don't look like they have, like, ridiculously short legs compared to arms and body and stuff. And I think, like, Games Workshop in general can be, like, they're something I was going to mention later, actually, but the fact that their plastic kits are so good nowadays, really, in general. And whereas Forge World, the quality is sort of diminished, but we'll talk about that.
We can get to that too,
for sure. So there we go.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just like, it would feel nice to just, like, assemble a model just as is and not feel the need that you need to fix stuff. But I feel, and admittedly, to me, stuff like Adeptus Titanicus and things like that have been somewhat of a nice relaxing thing for me, because I feel like you can just assemble them, like, their proportions aren't really a thing because they're just big robots, and, like, you don't have to think about, well, the human anatomy there. And even stuff like Battlefleet Gothic that I think you've broken into, I think offers sort of a nice, almost like a palate cleanser in a way.
Yeah, very, very true. Yeah, you don't really have to, other than adding a little bit of embellishment here or there, make it a little bit more unique or to your taste. Yeah, you don't, like, they're beautiful models, you know, especially in metal. They're beautiful models in general, so they don't really require that sort of touch overall, really.
Well, I guess we, an episode or two ago, had an episode kind of talking about true scale Space Marines and some of the different people who are involved in doing it and how it's changed over the years, and certainly mentioned you sort of at the forefront of people doing 30K stuff. And we kind of mentioned, like, wondered why you didn't put, like, abdomen spacers and such, and, like, wondered if you would comment a little bit on that. Like, why did you focus here on like putting spacers in the legs? And you've obviously mentioned a bit about how a component of it was just, like, the legs, you needed to repose them to be more natural. So that, I feel, has to be a component to why that was, like, where you started modifying things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the easiest inconsistency to sort of identify on the model, first and foremost. And I guess looking now, you guys have kind of red-pilled me, I guess, to some extent with the whole abdomen spacing. So I mean, it's much easier to see on certain models, certainly when when I've done the effort with the legs. Now it's like they maybe have quite a truncated body as a result, or it's more readily seen. I mean, I guess ultimately it's probably down to, like, a mixture of apathy and laziness on my part, if I'm perfectly honest. I mean, I think using these the model that you've got up at the moment, which is a what are they called? An Interemptor, which is a Dark Angels destroyer, for want of a better word. But I bought some of those along with me to a recent weekend away I had, romantic weekend I had away. And I had a bit of an experiment with the sizing off the back of your episode a couple of episodes ago, because I thought, actually, these guys are right. So, but I think it's something that probably moving forwards with, as I'm balls deep in about 30 to 35 Terminators at the moment.
Yeah, that's serious work.
Yeah, and I'm working. I am with Terminators. It's an awful lot easier to get that proportion correct. So I am actually adding a little bit of height with them around their waist, which should hopefully, with that bulky look a little bit more suitable overall, which is handy. Because I think Terminators have their own issues with proportions.
Oh yeah, oh god,
so,
their arms,
hulking shoulders, and all this kind of stuff. And I think they're very, very easy to get wrong.
They are.
But I think I'm quite satisfied with how I've got their proportions sorted out now. But I think for future power armored Marines, I'll probably get the
well, it's good to hear you've at least been maybe partially converted. But I mean, even with that said, like your armies that you've built and such look great, and there's a nice internal consistency there. So like, and I think part of the fun of the hobby is slowly growing and changing your, opinion on things or how you do things. And like, it's fun to kind of watch that. And certainly our thoughts and dismay at some of the proportions and things and GW models has changed a bunch over the years. And slowly, as you become more and more critical, like you realize, you know what, like that really does look weird. And even with like Primaris Marines, so much of them is similar to the older squatty Marines. Like they still basically use the same backpacks, arms, and even like their helmets. Like some of those components are interchangeable, but there are subtle differences. Like their helmets are slightly smaller and a little bit, I don't know, more streamlined in a way that I think slightly helps the proportions and it not look as odd. Like the helmets on most of the kind of traditional Space Marine armor are very bulbous, which could be okay depending on the size of the head within that. But then that changes from kit to kit. So like there are a lot of elements that you can just in your own sort of head canon put it like, oh, well, that's because the armor's bulky or isn't, and sort of work these things out. But
well, I feel for me, my sensibilities and thoughts have certainly changed a lot over the years. And I feel like certainly since I started the hobby, we all started with like around the 2nd edition, and a lot of the stuff, the models are pretty wonky looking, but like I went for so many years and never really thought anything of them, didn't really think they were that strange, and like even like weapon size and stuff, which we harp on like to no end. Like it took me a long time to really realize and decide that I didn't think that made sense and I didn't really like it. And so for the past few years, we've been converting smaller and smaller and smaller weapons. And I sort of feel like it always sort of goes in stages. I'll do something and I think like that's just right. And then the longer I look at it, you know what, like, well, I guess I could probably change this too, or so. I think there's always kind of a learning curve, and your sensibilities are changing as you're doing things. And
you're almost developing a style.
And I mean, it's certainly true with Games Workshop as well. Like if you look at, it was maybe the 3rd edition, was that with the Dark Eldar, or was that the 4th edition with they released the new plastic tactical Marines and like, oh, these are so great. And then they also released an assault squad, and they were a handful of the plastic heads without helmets. And if you look at those, they are huge. Yeah,
the original, like 3rd edition tactical squad, had a like 1 or 2 unhelmeted heads that are just gigantic.
And like it didn't take them that long before like they realized that they were probably too big. And then everything after that was significantly smaller. And so it's all of that kind of just changes over time. And I think you just kind of have to decide what you want to focus on and like what looks good to you. And I mean, all of your stuff looks fantastic, and I'm always really impressed with like how much, like you say, like you're like a hobby butterfly jumping between so many different projects. And to me, like I think most people, if they just go to your Instagram page, like it's like you have so much stuff, so many models that like you literally have armies of stuff, and like it's nice to see. Like I really like it.
It doesn't come across as you being much of a butterfly when like you actually have armies that you're painting and building. But with so many different games and stuff, it can be hard to stay super focused.
Yeah,
very, very true. I mean, I think you might be able to see just about in the background. I put a post up on this on Instagram some time ago, but there's a whiteboard with. I probably need about 4 or 5 more whiteboards of the same kind of size with projects I've got in tandem, I suppose. But I mean, in actual fact, it's a really handy way just to kind of keep on track with stuff. But I've deviated somewhat from when I wrote it down, because I then became extremely enamored with having as obviously as many Terminators as I could possibly field.
Yeah.
Cool. I love Terminators.
But I think at the same time, whilst people will often, I mean, I'm prone to saying, I said it myself, hobby butterfly. I think you should definitely, where possible, run with the muse, if that makes sense. So where you're feeling really, sort of like interested or inspired, I tend to be be my most productive in those sorts of periods of time. So I think, yeah, absolutely run with it if you can, and you'll realize that you may switch attention midway through, or hopefully you'll get to the end of a project and you'll have finished it and then you're ready for the next one. But I'll make the most progress, sometimes even getting like all the way up to like 90% done on a sculpt, for example, before leapfrogging into something else. but it's much better, in my opinion, than forcing yourself to do something. So
yeah,
I've got a hell of a lot of stuff I need to paint, but I know that I need to be in a certain mindset when it comes to painting it.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, at the moment, any hobby would be good, frankly, right now.
Yeah.
It's hopefully going to give me a slightly more productive sort of point of view, or perspective overall. Having gone from like a limited amount of stuff I can do to then slowly getting into other bits and pieces. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, really. And I think one of something that's important to talk about in terms of being able to get these projects done overall. One of the reasons I'm able to have like a large amount of points with my Death Guard, for example, is like I think obviously being really passionate about something in the first place. I think also having social media, it's a bit of a double-edged sword for sure. And I think a lot of people put themselves under undue pressure to sort of in the feeling that they owe something, or they have to get stuff done for people to consume, if you will. And I've definitely been sort of through that before myself at various points, stressing out because I need more content to share with people. Whereas in reality, it's still at the very core. It's me sharing something I'm passionate about with other people, and then maybe like they happen to like it or they don't or whatever. That's not something I need to be too concerned about. But also at the same time, getting that support from the community and getting people say, awesome work, or I've really enjoyed what you've done here. I find that this is really innovative, or this has helped me get into the hobby, or whatever it is. I think those are all really, really positive reinforcers to keep going with a specific project. And I think being able to see the light at the end of the tunnel as well. And I think that works very neatly into me maybe having quite a short attention span, for example, because I find that and I really hope that you guys agree here, but the converting aspect as opposed to painting, I think that you can see that progression so much more clearly from start to finish. So getting the concept in the first place, getting the bits together for that concept, and then slowly executing that to finality. I think that you get that clear, like, okay, I'm roughly halfway through, or But with painting, and certainly using specific techniques for painting, I think that it can be it maybe feels like you're going uphill a lot more than maybe you are. So, with the use of things like oils and weathering and stuff like this, it's only once you get most of the way through the project that you can start to see the end.
Yeah, no, it's true. I feel in painting, there's most of it looks like garbage, but it's only at the end where the things start to come together, and it can be hard to push past that, particularly if you've just spent all this time converting and such. It's not like you just threw together some marine from a box in a few minutes and just have at it. Like, you've invested so much, like you've said, and like you have this focus on converting that it can be hard to
for a long time. Related to that, it took me a long time to get back into painting, primarily because we've certainly started to focus a lot more on sculpting, really fine conversion work and whatnot. And I always would sort of feel like, oh, I'm gonna ruined it. Like, I just started painting it, like I put on the initial base coats. Well, this looks terrible, or and it can be discouraging. And then because some of the models, if you do a lot of sculpting and work like that, sometimes the notion of stripping the paint off of them is a lot trickier than what it would have been if you just had your metal models or whatnot. So even after we started our blog, it was probably 3 years before I started painting again. And so I still feel like I like the converting and sculpting aspect the most, because you can see a progression a lot easier. And I very much know what you're saying.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there with regards to that hesitation. Is that right? Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Being hesitant to get paint on a model that you've spent X amount of time on, and there is that anxiety there that you won't be able to execute the paint job to as high a standard as you have the conversion. And I know that there's quite a few people I know in the community who definitely feel the same way. And I remember when I first started painting my Death Guard, I think I only had to paint 1,000 points, and it was a double event about 2.5 years ago now. And I remember just being not necessarily having sleepless nights, but just being always having that thought in my mind, oh my God, I've got to paint them, but I'm going to really fuck it up. And but the best way over that is just charging in and just
I think
trial and error,
and I think I certainly understand the apprehension and have it sort of myself, but I think in general, you have so much attention to detail, pride with your work, and are so careful with it that I think that will carry through to painting as well. And even every painter talks about how the initial stages stuff looks bad, and I think that's just a portion of it, that if you do push through with it, I think you will usually do better than maybe you anticipated, or be happy with it. That I think part of it, just do it, plow into it, and I think it'll turn out okay. So, but it's a hard bridge to pass over. In particular, in your case, even 1,000 points, that's kind of small, but that's still a lot of models. Being able to paint 5 models would be oh my God, pat myself on the back, incredible how I did this. As opposed to units of 20 or something, oh God. But so I don't know, it's just I think that's just part of the general hobby progression. There's so many things to learn and do, and I think all of it can be fun, particularly if you can step back a little bit and realize this is to be fun and is a learning experience. And with social media, like you had suggested, you can kind of chronicle your own journey throughout the process and see that there's sort of how you've improved over time, which I think is pretty neat.
No, thanks.
Well, I guess we have certainly talked a little bit about the Horus Heresy here, but most of the stuff you do is focused in the Horus Heresy. What actually drew you to that? I think in the background I can see you have a bunch of the Siege of Terra, like hardbound books.
Yeah.
That sort of suggests your level of commitment and excitement about the Horus Heresy. Why the Horus Heresy?
Well, I think I'd always been quite into a lot of the Black Library publications. So I think that like anyone who says that they're remotely into things like Inc. 28 will have read Eisenhorn, for example.
Oh yeah, they're
great. And all this kind of stuff. And I mean, people fangirl over Dan Abnett an awful lot, but he is extremely talented. I think he wrote Horus Rising, which was the first of, I think it's 54 books.
It's a lot.
And that's not including. So he didn't write all of them, but the Horus Heresy books, and that's not including like novellas and stuff like that as well. So there's this extremely rich background for 30K, and I think it's probably one of the most established science fiction backgrounds. Full stop.
Yeah.
A lot of books for like Star Wars, for example, and stuff like that. But I think they're a little bit more disparate. But as a continual, albeit there are certain stages throughout the course of the book series where there are contradictions and things are retconned and stuff like that. But the opening line of Horus Rising, so I was there the day Horus slew the Emperor, and you're like, what the fuck? And then you realize it's actually like not like a red herring or whatever. You're getting gaslighted from the first line. But going into that and seeing this extremely rich, deep background to to a single Space Marine, for example. So you've got Garviel Loken, who becomes a member of Horus Lupercal's like inner circle, so to speak, and there are millions of Space Marines who are present at any one point in the Great Crusade, for example. So they all have their own very individual sort of characteristics and personalities, but they're also like 8 foot tall killing machines. Like wrought in the finest panoply of war, holding weapons that are have been developed to quash the threats to humanity in all corners of the galaxy. And that just sort of really lit my passion for the Horus Heresy in general. And I think that it's because of the breadth of the galaxy in which the Horus Heresy and obviously 40K is set. You have a huge amount of play with what you want to do with your army. How it fits into a part of a greater force, a greater organizations and structure. And I think that looking at that, and they sort of touch upon it in a lot of the Horus Heresy books, they kind of get into more of the administratum side of things. I mean, it's a very ugly, inefficient, corrupt organization in 40K for sure. And it's probably not that different in 30K, but seeing how that all slots into part of a greater imperium, and how you have those interactions between these characters that are introduced throughout the course of these books is fascinating stuff. And I think that it's something that really is the perfect canvas to work with when making models, and you could be making one model every 3 months, but going into so much detail or really getting into sort of like, and I think that one thing that's excellent at the moment and that's really positive for Dark Angels fans is that you've had the release of the 9th Black Book called The Crusade, where it's very overdue, but you're peeling back the layers and exposing the mythos behind the First Legion, who are like the prototype.
Yeah.
They're like that, married with the fact that Caliban was a world where you have this sort of knightly medieval kind of aesthetic and background. It just makes it a very rich Legion to dive into, and you're seeing all of this amazing work that's being produced by fans of the Dark Angels.
Did they kill the Thunder Warriors?
Well, there we go. I think they probably killed a few of them.
Yeah.
I mean, even then, like that a comment there, you've got Valdor, like Constantine Valdor, and I managed to pick up that book as well, and it's a fantastic read. Again, it's sort of honing in on one particular character, but you're looking back at elements of the background which have kind of been shrouded in uncertainty. That, and I think that this is an excellent tactic that Games Workshop have employed with regards to certain aspects of the fluff and the lore, but we don't really know what's going on with a lot of it. And you have like the Katagus or the Thunder Warriors, who we learn a little bit more about in that book Valdor, and it's so interesting, just to look at that, even just to see how the Emperor was and how he viewed his empire and his subjects.
Yeah.
He had his use for them, and then he discarded them because he was working on these new projects. How he was able to get the knowledge and technology to work on them. Did he shake the devil's hand? All this kind of stuff down the line. I think it's just how could someone who's into Games Workshop stuff not be drawn into
I think they've done a really good job of developing some of that lore and expanding it and making it better than, because I mean there was certainly, at least in the beginning, the worry like, well, are they going to do a disservice to this? But I think Dan's first book was so good and added so many interesting elements, human characters from the Remembrancers to like making the Space Marines more interesting, and from the different legions interesting. And I think they've been able to add a huge amount of depth, which is very compelling. And then even Forge World with their black books being able to step back and not be as a human element, but more like military historical texts. That is also like a really neat avenue to explore this, and which has resulted in some of, I feel, the best described and coherent stuff in like the Games Workshop canon. And I think that's really appealing, and it fits with this idea that the lore and stuff changes, and it's like they're just different accounts, so like that can kind of, at least to a point, get over this fact that there is some retconning or things, how like, oh, I thought they said this or that, and it doesn't matter that much just because of how history is recorded over thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's a great setting, and I've always been a Dark Angels fan since 2nd edition, so I guess I need to look into the newest book to see how they expanded some of that stuff. I mean, they finally got their new Primarch model, which I think is great looking, like, so that's nice to see. To see.
Well, they only have one more they have to make, right?
The Khan. The Khan Jagatai.
That's impressive. Like, I still remember back when Simon Egan first sculpted Angron, and it's like, damn, like, I can't believe like they're actually making some of these models and like how good they actually look.
Well, I guess towards that end of how good some of those like Angron and stuff looks, I feel unfortunately over like the last few years there's been somewhat of certainly a slowing of the output, Forge World's output of Horus Heresy things, as well as I think somewhat of a downgrade of a lot of the model quality. Like, let's just throw out some kind of bad looking Space Wolves just to like get the fans off our back and say we've done something, but it's just not the level of maybe towards the beginning when like Angron was released and all these Primarch models were released at a more rapid pace and all the different interesting tank variants and stuff. It was like all so exciting. But I feel more recently, I guess, with their effort being split between all the specialist games and stuff, it's been somewhat depressing to see how little Horus Heresy stuff has been released. Like, what's your take on that? And
yeah, I mean, I think it's whilst it's inevitable that any kind of studio is going to work towards more modern materials and programs and technology. So a lot of the models are now computer designed, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I obviously prefer the old hand sculpted miniatures, right? And I think you mentioned Angron. I think another really good example of this is the old. You can still get it on Forge World, but it's a set of 2 Praetors. So captains, basically.
Yeah.
One in Cataphractii Terminator armor and one in power armor, right? And it's all sculpted by hand. Now they're never going to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? They've been done by hand, but there's a certain attention to detail and level of detail on those that cannot be replicated using computer software. And I think that Forge World are in a situation now where they obviously have traditional sculptors at their disposal. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that. I don't know whether or not it's like a control thing in the studio or whatever, if they wanted to have it like 100% one way or not, because obviously the lion has been sculpted by hand.
No, it's just incredible.
It's a breathtaking model,
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. When they first announced it, my jaw was on the floor. It's stunning. Everything to do with that model is outrageously good. But I think that what I'd like to see is maybe for them to pick their battles, as it were, and maybe realize that, okay, maybe doing things like tanks and suits of armor itself,
Mm-hmm.
okay, you get away with using CAD, but maybe things like, I don't know, heads and details like that, more organic looking materials,
Mm-hmm.
and like chainmail, stuff along those lines. Maybe we should go back to our roots with these and make them a little bit more like old school. And
yeah, I feel Simon Egan is a treasure.
Well, you mean
Yeah,
from when Forge World first started, I mean, Simon Egan, he's been there, from my knowledge, from pretty much the very beginning, and like most of like the initial stuff Forge World released, he like did everything. Like, at least in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like the infantry, he did like I'm pretty sure this is true. He did like all of the Death Corps. He did all of the Elysian drop troops. He did most of the initial Tyranids. He like so much stuff, and like there's just so much visual interest and greatness. Like, I'm glad like he sculpted not all of the Primarch models, but the majority of them, and like you can certainly tell like
I don't think too many people would have been able to accomplish what he did and be able to take all that legacy and expectation of people and like make good on it and maybe even do better than you anticipated. Because I feel there are lots of other companies that make kind of knockoff Primarch models that just none of them hold a candle to what he's been able to achieve and the level of thought. I mean, and even just improving the proportions and such, and not holding true to kind of the garbage looking proportions of most of the Horus Heresy Space Marines.
Well, so I'm going to jump in.
Go
here and say something about. So it seems to me probably with the digital sculpting, you could probably achieve the quality of some of the older things. It's just, I wonder, perhaps the effort is as much effort isn't put into it. It's like, I can't imagine you couldn't make like a lot of the same greatness digitally, but with the probably ease of just replicating things, perhaps they just don't spend the time, because oftentimes like chains and mass produced things often look worse on the digital sculpts, and I feel like they probably wouldn't have to look worse. It's just maybe they don't spend the time to make them look as good as they could. But I mean, I'm not a digital sculptor, so I don't know.
Well, I think you make a very good point there, because in my notes I made to some of your questions, you'll see that, like, you'll have a decline in, let's say, quality of Forge World product, right? Okay, let's not even get into the release schedule at all.
Yeah.
That's something else entirely, right? And I get that they're, at the end of the day, they're a company, they want to make money, they're going to go the game systems that they can cash in on most. So Necromunda, Blood Bowl, this kind of stuff, right? And it's sad, because I'll say very quickly, it does seem like they're quite reliant on the Horus Heresy community at sort of keeping the hype up themselves, which I don't think that's right. I think that I'm incredibly lucky to be part of that community that keeps things interesting and still have that passion without being prompted by the creator, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I think that if you look at the quality of Games Workshop kits, like plastic, in recent times, they've been phenomenally good. So
they're getting better and better.
Whether it's, you have a set amount of time that these designers are allowed to work on these kits before, let's say Tony Cottrell, the head of Forge World, is like, hey, you've got a week to do these Varangia Terminators, and they're like, oh shit, okay, let's throw some bananas in there, right? But you've got it may well be down to the fact that the creators are able to, but they've not been given the time, or they've been given very tight deadlines, or because
I think that is almost certainly a large component of it, because almost all of them, like, if you get there, like, and you're doing it, you obviously have talent as a sculptor, but like, I don't think everyone is given as much time as like Simon Egan. Like, I feel they just give him like, all right, take the time you need, make this as good as you can. Whereas I feel probably most don't get that luxury.
And I mean, those Praetor models you brought up from, like, I think Edgar is the one who sculpted those. He just sculpted them from the ground up, so like he wasn't taking like pre-existing Space Marine elements and stuff. And so like I think that in itself, giving like the sculptors the ability to go and like rework the finger joints, or like how like all these different aspects of the armor are, like, you wouldn't need to do that, but I think giving the artist the freedom to do some of that stuff will often result in some of the most interesting and like forward moving things. And like there's so much expression and stuff in those in the faces, and just like their armor in general, that like those are the things that I'd like to see. And then like also like in terms of like the artwork, like some of the older artwork was just so like it wasn't at all tied to the models themselves, and there was just so much visual interest and interesting ideas that you could see in them. And for a long time, for a number of years, like I think also the art quality declined as well, and it was just like the only images you saw were like direct copies or very similar to the models themselves, and that doesn't always help push like the medium forward and like kind of get viewers and stuff excited to kind of do their own thing, take their own inspiration from things. So it's interesting to think about, and I feel the more of an artist you can see in any individual sculpt, the better, I feel, because that
and letting them do their own thing, take it their own direction, like, is interesting, rather than just like copy and paste stuff in whatever digital sculpting stuff they use, and give them the opportunity to add their own flair
because
to
like
it.
I know there was kind of like a shitstorm when some of Forge World maybe a few years ago released some new Space Wolf stuff, and they had slightly different like bolters and stuff where it was obvious that like different things were like upside down, so it like very much spoke to the notion where they probably just had some digital elements, and it's like, well, let's make this a little different, flip this up, change the direction of that, and it's like, whatever, that's fine. And it doesn't, and I most people wouldn't be excited to see that because it's not.
Yeah,
I think that very neatly slots into talking about how tolerant we as fans, I suppose, are of these half-assed. I'm going to be perfectly honest, but like, you know, there's talking about having a human element in design and them using CAD. You know, if they're able to produce high quality models, ultimately, it doesn't matter which process they use. But when they're still putting like a certain price tag on models or sets of models, when they really haven't, they obviously aren't to the same standard as we're used to, then I think there's an issue there. When I think people should quite rightly can be annoyed. I think there's obviously an accepted amount of annoyed people should be. You know, you should torching cars outside and stuff like that. But I think that at the same time, you know, I don't like how it's just, you know, we've got to lay down and sort of take it that's the sort of status quo. And I think that it's important, certainly important, to give a little bit of pushback so Games Workshop or Forge World can acknowledge that actually, you know, that's not quite right. And I think that what they did with the Space Wolves Praetor is they ended up, I think they took them off sale for a period of time, and I think they reworked the file. Now, don't quote me on this. I just remember it being put up on sale, and then there was a bit of a backlash. They took them off and changed some things over. So I think the guy had like a combi bolter that had no grip. You know? Which makes me question whether or not there's even like a quality control within in general. Right? So I think that it needs to be met kind of halfway. I think that I'm not saying that we're being treated like we're played like fools, so to speak, but I don't think it's wrong to sort of go, well, actually, Forge World, you know, I've been into Horus Heresy for a while now, and you guys just aren't quite hitting it where you used to. You know, is there maybe something you can do about this? Maybe hire more people for the team, or give people slightly longer, or give them more of a heads up before releases are due, so they can maybe make this fur, or like work out. Like, the thing is, this is the hilarious thing with CAD. All they need to do is work out a decent template for fur once, and then they can span it as much as they want. So they might as well spend a bit more time initially just to get it more realistic, and then take it from there. And then people don't feel quite so ripped off when they get these models and they're like, okay. And I think that's a fantastic example using those Varangia Terminators, because I've never seen so many. You obviously get models which have, you have units that have rules but no models that people have made. Homebrew version. But you've never before have I seen quite so many models, rules that have models, but people have opted to do their own version because, you know, the company that are making them they're not doing it right, basically. You know, and I think I'm not being like a snobby arsehole saying that. I think that a lot of people would agree with me, you know, by and large about it. So, you know.
Agreed. Well, I guess one thing we could sort of shift into is obviously the Horus Heresy is probably Games Workshop's closest thing to like a historical setting. That I feel with that comes some maybe the possibility of elitism sort of in the community. And certainly recently there was the Simon Elson, or I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce his name, but he had a White Dwarf article about his Sons of Horus army that was kind of a backlash. There were Primaris in there and all this stuff. And like, so what's your take on that? And this idea that there is elitism in the hobby, and I mean, admittedly, it's kind of throughout the entire hobby, but I think it's easier to perhaps see in this historical setting.
Now, if I could crack my knuckles, I would. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, but I think this is the thing, right? I don't think there's anything dirty about the word elitist or about the word gatekeeper, right? I got into this hobby, I got into Horus Heresy because it was pretty clear cut with regards to, when certain marks of armor were available, right? The development of those throughout the course of the Great Crusade, and then the adaptations that had to be made when resources were scarce, for example. I like that kind of causal, or like that sort of that relationship you have, that deep established lore. You have like what starships were available, when certain legions were around, which Primarchs were present at the triumph at Ulanor, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I think the difference is that it's kind of pseudo-historic war game.
Yeah.
Obviously it's science fiction, but I think that all this, like 54 books and then a load of novellas and then background in the black books, I think that that's there to for the most part to be adhered to. And like I said earlier, that still allows for an insane amount of scope. Okay?
Yeah.
An enormous amount of scope. And I think that, like, obviously, if Forge World are kind of there as more of a background presence at the moment, they're every now and again throwing out a release. People are buying it, they're adding them to their armies, they're buying this rule book, all this kind of stuff. That's great. And, you've got people who are coming up with ideas for conversions for characters and stuff like that off the back of these releases. That's perfect. But I don't think it's wrong for people to want to uphold that established law by saying, okay, well, there's reading into things and having an interpretation of something, and then there's out and out just ignoring something. So case in point, having Mark 10 armor in Horus Heresy, and people saying, oh, well, it's artificer armor or something along those lines. It's like, well, okay, that's, again, I may get people shit on me for saying this, but that's just a very lazy approach, in my opinion. And I'm one of these people, I put in as much effort as I choose to in the hobby. Okay, I'm not expecting other people to do that. That's down to them, how much they want to, how much or how little they want to. Okay, that's on me, how I read into my hobby, right? But at the same time, you have this excellent community where very small part of it toxic, let's not forget that. But we've got this excellent community where you can consistently turn up to narrative events. You'll have people, let's say you have 20 players. Every single one of these players brings a fully painted army to the event, and they're all in era-appropriate suits of armor. And you have, maybe you've got a guy that just got into it a month ago, and he's very quickly painted them up in a scheme, and he's maybe a little bit embarrassed or sheepish or whatever, but you reinforce his interest because he'll see all these other armies and things, and he's like, holy shit, this is an amazing hobby that I've become part of and that I've been welcomed into, and that I'm not getting people shouting down at me or anything for having an army that doesn't look like it's Golden Demon standard, because we all start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But what I love is that you turn up to these events and you'll have everything, every single model, and I maybe sound like a bit of a hypocrite because I think on a couple of occasions I haven't been quite fully painted, and that's on me. I feel guilt for that. It's extraordinary for people to turn up with unpainted armies, and I think that it really helps reinforce the immersion. It helps with the sort of the visual aspect of games where you're wanting to take photos of the game as it progresses to put on Instagram or whatever, or to share with friends, because it really looks really impressive, and your opponent has put in effort. Okay, there's a baseline of effort that's been put in there. Okay, again, it's down to them how much precisely they've invested in in their army and how much they've wanted to convert models or how much standard they want to paint them to. But at the very least, you if you go to like a 40k event, and I think that this is almost like a meme. You get like a situation where you turn up and you're playing a Tyranid army, and it's just a bunch of empty bases, and you're kind of like, well, what is this? There's not that same level of investment, and I, for one, I'll be damned if I, for a second, through not gatekeeping, through tacit approval and allowing people to kind of think, okay, well, I'm gonna use. I want to have an army that I can use in 40k, but also I want to use it in 30k. But the people, the vocal elements who don't want that, they can shut the hell up, and I'm going to use them anyway. Like I don't really think that is very what's the word? It's not very fair to people who do the effort in, right? Like I said earlier, it's a game of 2 or more players, right? And I would risk being called an asshole if someone came up to a Horus Heresy event with a purely Primaris army, saying, "Oh, they're Imperial Fists, but they're all in Mark 10 and they're repulsive that it counts as." I'd just say to them, "I'm really sorry, but I don't want to play this army." Why? Sorry, go for it.
No, I was going to say, like, well, so you're talking about the notion of, like, people have to start somewhere. Like, if somebody just got into the hobby, read, like, the first 2 Horus Heresy books, like, wow, this stuff's really cool, and then tried to build an army, like, they're probably going to get some of that stuff wrong because there are 50-some books. They read 2 of them.
Most of the models you can't even get from Forge World anymore.
Okay. But they're really excited about it. Like, they're never going to get all that stuff right. I feel like when I think about gatekeeping, most of the time, I think about, like, in the video game industry where, like, maybe women are, like, said to be fake fans because they can't list off some inane details about the original Mario games or something. Like, so I feel like there's often a lot of bad stuff associated with gatekeeping, preventing people who want to get into something, keeping them away from it because they feel that the people who are really entrenched in it are going to jump upon them and complain about what they did. So I think a lot of it is it just comes down to how you oftentimes, particularly if you're in person, it's harder to do on, like, Instagram and stuff like that. You can sort of gauge and tell the level of interest people have in it, and if maybe they haven't achieved the level that you would say maybe want them to. Like, I mean, obviously there are tactful ways where you can tell people, like, hey, like, you're doing a great job here. I'm glad you're getting into this. One of the things, like, you could look into and think about is, like, different armor marks so, like, I feel there's a way to, like, broach all of that stuff. And I think with sort of the culture, the internet culture of, like, Instagram and stuff like that, I feel it is often pretty easy to vilify people who have, like, strong opinions or are trying to tell people, like, hey, you could do a little better. And they're not necessarily out there trying to be an asshole or anything. It's just particularly certain stuff like this, like, people do have strong opinions and they really care about certain details and stuff. And so, like, that matters to them. And oftentimes they, like, would like other people to care about that stuff as well. And some of that, the only way you're going to realize that maybe you're doing something wrong or something could be better is if someone actually will come and tell you.
Yeah.
I think, admittedly, like, certainly with the White Dwarf thing, I think a lot of it, Games Workshop could just do a better job of cultivating a community and supporting it, because they know, like, people do like this idea of this historical element, but not even be able to buy most of the Forge World models anymore. Like I think even the plastic Mark IV stuff isn't in stock anywhere. Like they're doing sort of a disservice to something they've already spent a while helping create in the community creating by like you're not even easily being able to buy this stuff to do a good job. And then in like such a slow release schedule, then the only thing they put in White Dwarf maybe is like an article that has Primaris in it, and it's like, is this seriously how you're going to repay these dedicated fans? Like I feel it would just help if they approached it a little bit more carefully.
Yeah, I
at
totally
times agree. And because I think it's certainly worthwhile to say like, hey, like I don't think Primaris, like just straight Primaris are helping this setting. It can destroy the immersion and whatnot. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong in saying that, but I think it can be difficult, and like just through Instagram it can seem like, oh, you're just so terrible that you're saying this, and like that I don't think anyone would argue that you're trying to prevent someone from enjoying the hobby their way. It's just you want to say like, if you want to become a part of this great community who does all these interesting narrative things, it's something you could consider, that like trying to like stick to certain tenets. And I think that that's helpful, but it can get lost in all the internet chat room sort of stuff.
Yeah, very, very much agree. I think that for sure, the editors of White Dwarf massively dropped the ball, because they're kind of the authority, quote unquote, for this game. So a lot of people now who think, okay, well, what do I need to get involved with Horus Heresy? Oh, cool, I can use Primaris, and that this is not going to be the end of the situation.
Yeah.
I think, but I'm never going to be one. Like, there are 2 points really. I think that it's people who decide to do that, if they're given constructive feedback, like you said, then I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think that whoever's giving that feedback, they shouldn't be put in a position where they're being vilified by others because they're not being accepting or anything along those lines. If you, like you said, if you want to be part of a pseudo-historic war game, you should be prepared to kind of go put in a little bit more effort and buy kit or whatever.
I guess maybe I would say that at least if you're going to engage in the community through like internet, Instagram, Facebook, stuff like that, I think it bears in mind everyone should maybe think step back a little bit and think about how they word stuff. Because I think that could help some of this stuff too. That if they were at that event, like you're saying, with a core group of really dedicated people, and they could improve stuff, I think the people there would be encouraging and try to like, hey, this is great. You can, this is what I do to get around the fact that, oh, Forge World doesn't sell this stuff anymore, or like, and I think that can help build this community better. But if it's just through Instagram and that sort of thing, it really behooves you to really think carefully about what you're saying to ensure that it's taken in a positive way.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I have definitely been guilty in the past of being quite intense when I've been maybe facing down against like one of these posts, or I have found something wrong with it. And I'm more than willing to hold my hand up and say that I've probably acted in quite a poor manner, and I've given people the wrong impression of people in that part of the community, that niche in general. But like you said, I think without players, the hobby will die. And I think that it's important I think it's still very much alive, the Horus Heresy, and I think that people are still super passionate about it. I know people within the UK and people I've played with before who have maybe dropped out quite recently, and they've been playing things like Middle-earth strategy battle game and stuff like that instead of different systems that they're really passionate about, and maybe they are suited better to a far more positive community. I don't think that lockdown and stuff like that has been particularly healthy these kinds of discussions at all. I'd like to think that if and when, touch wood, we start getting events again where people are able to break bread and share drinks and catch up and all this kind of stuff, there'll be a lot of this tension will just dissipate, if you will. But yeah, I think there's an awful lot of currency in what you're saying, and that people should just be, we're human after all. It can be difficult. We all have shit that we go through. I think if we can try to be more accepting and positive overall with regards to like how we approach giving feedback, right? Yeah. I still think feedback should be given. I don't certainly. Think without, like, if you get to a situation where people aren't allowed to say anything other than, oh my God, that's amazing, then you get like this saturation within the hobby, which I think is
just echo chambers.
Yeah, and I think echo chambers in general, regardless of the subject matter, are awful, really, really bad. And it really puts people in a situation where, let's say they do get released into the wild, so to speak, and online they've just been told that their Primaris Horus Heresy army is the shit, and they go to events and people are like, well, actually, they get like a very different response.
Yeah.
And they're going to be pissed off and almost feel like they've been lied to the entire time anyway. Yeah. But as many players as we can get for the Horus Heresy, better. But I still think that there needs to be a minimum bar of entry, if that makes sense. Also, which I don't think is challenging to meet.
Well, I feel like our blog and our podcast and all that, like we are very critical of Games Workshop and their models, but like I would like to think that most people realize that is done because we care so much about it, and I think we try to be constructive and try and push the hobby forward and get people to realize that some of that stuff. And I guess in terms of using Primaris Marines, like I feel one of my favorite models you have made, you based off of a Primaris Marine, that you took part in that like Knights Errant project, and what are they even called? The Primaris like Eradicators, or what, some dumb name.
I think something along those lines.
The one like sniper, the little like sniper units. Like I feel like what you did there, like you modified the legs, you like removed some of the like striking Primaris elements, sculpted in some other cabling and stuff like that. And so like I think like if I were to approach making a Horus Heresy army, I would most certainly use Primaris Marines because their proportions are better and they're a better starting point. But that being said, I would be going in and removing like those like round like ankle things, the little fins on their knee pads, like all of those things, because you're right, it does, when you see that, like the first thing you think of is Primaris. It's not like Horus Heresy and stuff like that. So for me going into it, like details like that, I would want to change them and modify them because I think it helps push the narrative and kind of show what you're trying to accomplish. But then again, like based on like what I'm interested in, then I would also be changing all their weapons. Like I don't like the look of those bolters. Why don't they have stalks? Why don't they have front and rear sights? Like that doesn't make sense.
Everyone's hobby, right? But I think you're, Jack, are doing a good job. Like you, in your Instagram thing, you're showing people how you how you think it's good to be done. Like if you're like, I don't like Primaris, but you're still showing people that, hey, like I do use them from time to time and this is what I do. So I think that's good, a good positive thing, to be able to talk about what you like and don't like, but then also show it. So I think that could help newer people realize like, oh, I have all these Primaris, I could still use them, but if you put a little more effort, I think a lot of people would be excited about it.
Yeah, for sure. I should probably just backtrack somewhat. I completely agree with Adam in terms of the size. The proportions are spot on for Primaris, but out of the box, let me say, they need an amount of modification, and I think that the amount of modification required, it would probably require some like fairly intermediate skills
to pull off,
to, a specific standard, so to speak. So, yeah.
No, it can be difficult, but yeah, as I said, it's neat to see like people like you showing kind of the community like this is stuff. If you do want to get more of that Primaris proportion or scale, like it's certainly possible, and it doesn't always have to be super challenging. And just showing people how you do that is good. Which, I mean, maybe that can bring us to perhaps one final topic we could talk about. Like, you recently created a YouTube channel. Was that something you've been considering for a while? And what are some of your goals for it? And maybe some of that to be able to show people like this is how you do these, or how I do things, and would like to, if you want to get these better proportions for like sort of like a Primaris scale or proportion, you can still do it. And this is how I go about it. Is that something you've considered?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I've had my YouTube channel for a short while now. However, I've kind of been, had a bit of an on again, off again relationship with it. So, I mean, I'll generally just try and spend 99.9% of my hobby time as a whole behind the desk, if that makes sense.
Models and
pretty much, and and it's a massive escapism for me to do that. And it's I decided to start doing a few videos about some of the vehicles that I've worked with, and maybe a kind of like videos for newbies to things like Forge World vehicle kits and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The sorts of things that you should look for, sorts of difficulties and issues that you can encounter with these sorts of kits at large. But even then, it was kind of like, okay, now and then I've recently upgraded my phone as well. So I was using a really shitty old phone with a really terrible camera and really bad memory. So the camera would overheat and all this kind of stuff. So it was kind of like more of an interest in terms of seeing how, like, what kind of raw quality I could get. And I think that people kind of like the videos I did. I think I've got the Medusa tank there, and I did one on a Land Raider as well. And I think that down the line, I suppose it's dipping my toe in sort of testing the waters to some extent. But I've kind of been forced into this position recently where it's kind of all I can do. I can chew over and plan projects in my head, work out what bits I need for those projects, and source those ahead of time. So when I'm in a position where I can start working again, I can hit the ground running, so to speak. I mean, obviously, I don't want to hit the ground because that can cause more issues with the shoulder. But so I can really sort of like, get straight back into it again where possible. I'm obviously going to be extremely sensible with my rehab and getting. I wouldn't want to cause any long-term damage or anything like that. Certainly. So I'm going to try and be quite sensible with it. But in the meantime, so other than sourcing parts and chatting with people and reading some of the literature and stuff like that, I think that, it's a nice opportunity to look back at some of the projects that I've really enjoyed working on, and they mean an awful lot to me as a creator, to have made these. And I've usually with a lot of the projects that I've worked on, I've also written up like a short bit of background or lore to them as well. So I'm obviously a bit of a narcissist and like the sound of my own voice. So I record these and use voice modulation and all this kind of stuff, just to try and make it an engaging, engaging model to people who are that way inclined to looking at these videos and things. And I've received, like, obviously from you guys, you've been very kind and given me some good feedback. And on YouTube, I've had people commenting and leaving great feedback as well, which means an awful lot. Like I said, it really helps you develop. And whilst I can't pick up tools, I've been trying to hone skills with this sort of editing app that I've got on my phone. Working out what works, like music and background, and I think I
Yeah.
worked briefly yesterday on like a little intro video that I can put before I start doing the sort of the narration, if you will. But yeah, I mean, I've got plenty of models and cases, and it's a really good use of time. I mean, first and foremost, it stops me going insane because I'm basically under house arrest, so to speak. So, I mean, it's very frustrating, but it's for the best ultimately. Obviously my girlfriend cares very much and doesn't want me to get into a situation where I injure myself again, right? It's just a bit of a shame that the weather's so lovely at the moment. But yeah, I mean, it's a very creative outlet. It means that I don't feel guilty for not doing anything. I'm able to learn new stuff as well. And I'm also able to give a little spotlight on some of these older projects that may be beloved to some of my followers.
Well, so like I would say, like I think this sort of also relates to like kind of encouraging more people into the hobby, like, and like kind of showing what people could maybe like aspire to. Like I could certainly see like people, if they were getting into the Horus Heresy, like, man, look at all these cool Forge World vehicles and stuff. They go and buy one, it's like, oh my god, this doesn't fit together at all. Like I have no idea what to do. This looks terrible. So like I think some of the little videos you have, I think, can be tremendously helpful for helping newer and even older people kind of tackle some of the issues inherent with a lot of the stuff, because like some of those Forge World vehicles, like, wow, they're super cool. Like to get them to a state where they look really good, it requires so much effort, and like some of the tools and stuff that might be best for the task, Games Workshop doesn't always do a great job of telling you what you should be using. And like green stuff, for instance, while it's great, isn't necessarily the best tool for the job. And like their mold line removers and stuff, like just in general, like there are so many different tools and stuff that if just people are aware of, like, oh, these exist, like that is a huge boon and is very helpful. And so I think just in general, your videos showing and talking about some of that, sort of showing how they could be used, is like tremendously helpful. And even I feel if people don't necessarily comment a lot or say a lot of that stuff, like I think there are a ton of people who get a lot out of it. And seeing your different like character, these like little retrospective series is wonderful. And because you can get a lot out of pictures and stuff, but if you're there kind of touching on different points, it's really interesting to hear like kind of what your approach was, like why you did certain things. And I think it's a great resource, and I'm glad you're making more videos, and I look forward to seeing what you do with it. But I think in general, it's a great service for the community, and you can really show people, like, if you're excited about it, like, these are things you can do, and it will just elevate everyone's hobby.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, I think ultimately, when I'm in a healthier position, I would love to really get into some of the processes and techniques that I'm probably best known for. So lengthening legs and doing all that kind of stuff, sculpting soft armor and trying to sort of make accessible like very clean, easy to follow videos that are maybe like bite-sized, like a quick 10-minute video that someone could watch on their lunch break or something. But they watch it at lunch, and then that evening they go home and they've ordered the tools and they've got everything ready. They can, maybe they have to torch a few sets of legs or something to practice on. But it should help them sort of diversify their armies a little bit and spend a bit more time in creating interesting characters and stuff like that. But I guess sort of until then, I'll be continuing to work on this retrospective series. But yeah, ultimately, like that's sort of the idea would be to have a few different aspects to the YouTube page in general. So if someone wanted to just do some painting and put some retrospectives on in the background, great. If they wanted to really look into detail, into like a high quality video, where I can show them the tools they need, and and I can talk about, I can maybe even make some mistakes myself in the tutorial, so that they can realize, it's all of us make
it's gonna happen,
this kind of stuff, and just sort of make it a little bit more like lighthearted and stuff. I think that would be very good, and I think that I like the idea. I mean, we've chatted about Patreon and stuff like that, but I like the idea of these sorts of things being passed down within the community quite readily, because ultimately there's maybe a few of us who have done things off their own back and had this trial and error and discovered things, and then but ultimately we've been passed down this knowledge, and I think it's great to be able to make that something that the people can sort of watch and give it a go themselves, and they have I'm always going to be accessible for people to get in touch with if they have any questions or stuff like that. So and I think that, again, like the whole toxicity thing aside, I like to come across at least as being quite a positive influence at large. But yeah, it's very, very kind that you're saying these things anyway. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get out of this room now. My ego's been so inflated.
Well, I think one thing to touch on, it's also nice, I think, even with the retrospective videos, that is another way to kind of show people how like you can really incorporate lore and background narrative writing into your armies as well. So I think, just the ability to sort of show people things rather than just tell them or like show one picture, I think is helpful. And so I think this will be a nice way to extend the things you do. So I think that's exciting, and I ultimately would encourage anyone who hasn't to go and find your YouTube channel, which it's just Anvils of Konor, right?
Yeah,
on YouTube, and subscribe and watch some of the videos.
And I guess one more thing that I want to say related to that, just not really a critique or anything, but the notion, I would continue to some of the general tips and stuff about how you mix green stuff and milliput, the tools you use. I would probably continue to come back and mention that stuff in a lot of the videos, because you never necessarily know when people will start watching, and I feel there are certain points like that, the more you can harp on them the better, because the notion you're sculpting with green stuff, having the proper tools, or lubricating your tools, some of that stuff is just so helpful. And even for me with sculpting, I went so many years not doing certain things, and it's just finally, after hearing it enough times, all right, I'll try it. And it's wow, man, that was dumb. Why wasn't I doing this all along? So I think some of that stuff, the more you can kind of get those ideas out there, the more you will actually encourage people to realize okay, I will actually try that, or I should get those tools.
Yeah, I can achieve this as well. Yeah,
I know that's a really, really good point, actually. Yeah, for sure, because people are going to be watching these videos at different points. I think one thing that I will always go on about is, and I think I mentioned it in a lot of my videos, probably not all of them, but about using fresh scalpel blade, for example.
Oh, that's so important.
You guys will know what I'm on about here. But the amount of people that I know who I'm good friends with, and they're I've used the same scalpel blade for the last 3 months, and I feel physically sick.
Oh my god!
And obviously, these things they should come with a disclaimer. It's a non-sterile surgical blade, so it is it's there for cutting. So just be extremely careful with it. But people should be intelligent enough to know that a blade is going to be pointy and cutty, if you know what I mean. But yeah, with that kind of stuff, that's a very good point, just to address that. So to the casual viewer, they can be oh shit, okay, maybe I've not been explicit, and I guess it avoids down the line. It means that I won't have as many people coming back to me saying, oh, but how do you do this? And I'm oh, okay, here we go. not this merry-go-round again. yeah, no, very, very, very sage advice there. Thanks.
Yeah, well, I guess maybe with that, we've been talking for almost like approaching 2 hours here. So maybe it's time we wrap this up, and maybe hopefully we could have you on at some time in the future to talk about more things, how your YouTube channel's progressing and other projects. But I guess with that, thank you so much for joining us here. And do you have any last things you'd like to say? Anything you'd like to plug? Anything like that?
Well, just first and foremost, thank you very much indeed for having me on, guys. It's been a really enjoyable interview. It's probably the best interview I've had, actually, with regards to hobby and things along those lines. We've been able to sort of get to grips with some pretty large topics.
Yeah.
Which is great, and it's nice to know that I'm not just screaming into the void with this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I will say as well, I did make a note of this earlier to mention it, but you guys and a project that you did in May of 2016 is the reason I'm doing Death Guard in the first place. So you did these excellent
the little, like the cataphracti Terminator models, like
Chef's Kiss. It was so good. There was one in particular though that had like an autocannon, and
he's cool.
In the same way that I was looking at the White Dwarf as a kid, looking at the Emperor's Champion, sorry.
Yeah.
Like, when you just see that one of those miniatures, and I think that was one of those examples where I thought, holy shit, this is this is really, really cool, and I want to kind of try and replicate this as much as possible. So you have my thanks for the implacable 14th, so to speak. Thanks to the viewers as well and listeners as well. It's been a great experience. But yeah, thanks overall, guys. I've had a really good time.
Yeah, well, it's been great chatting with you. Yeah. And
keep up the good work.
Thank you.
YouTube channel's great. I always look forward to seeing what you're doing, like whether it's like making new videos, painting, any of that. Like, it's just good to see another creator and their kind of ideas and breadth in the hobby. Like, it's great.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, all right. With that, thanks everybody for listening, and we will talk to you again soon.
Cheerio.
All right,
yeah, that was a good podcast. We did talk about a lot of, like, I would say, like, serious topics, and I think we got a lot of good points in, and like, I think people just kind of have to, taking a step back and realizing that, like, all the people in this hobby are people, and they're not necessarily trying to, like,
be dicks.
Yeah.
That we all have this.
Some are, that's true.
But in general, we have this shared language that we all love and have come to. That if we would, meet each other on like a subway or someplace, like, we have so much in common that it's a shame to be too much of an asshole about things.
That's a very good point. We've got far more in common than not. So like focusing on the positives rather than the differences, I suppose. There we go. Sweet. So I mean, if you once editing has been done, if you want to give me some links and I can throw those up.
No, certainly. I'll certainly do all that and have all the links and stuff. So yeah, it should be edited shortly.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thanks again, guys. I've had a really good time. Hope you guys have as well.
Certainly. I love talking with different people about the hobby in general, because we all have different perspectives and stuff. And like, I know I've learned a lot from streams and stuff and interviews like this, like about, say, different tools and stuff that I probably should have been using and hadn't, like all of that, like getting different perspectives is very important, and like, I think everyone can benefit from it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Righty ho. Well, I'll leave you guys to it. I've got a rumbling belly. I've got to eat some lunch.
Yeah.
But take it easy, guys, and I'll chat to you soon. All right.
Yeah. Thanks everybody, and thanks for everyone in the chat. Stygian Thorn, everybody, Nordic, Nick, everybody. It's been great.
Thanks for the follow.
Yep. See you, everybody.
Yep.
Cheerio.
Talk to you again soon.